Hey everybody, and welcome to this episode of Transit Tangents. My name's Lewis.
And I'm Chris.
And today we are revisiting a place and a topic that we have been before. We're taking a trip down memory lane to our first insert your city here using only public transit, going all the way back to Salt Lake City, which I'm pretty excited about.
Yeah.
That was like our first really big project for this.
It was our first transit tangents in the field, kind of. Well, I wouldn't say in the field because we taught
First in the field outside of Austin.
Yeah, we taught Michelle how to ride the bus in a very early episode. But yeah, this is our first transit tangents field trip.
Absolutely, and we're gonna kind of lean on some of our knowledge that we learned while on that trip. If you haven't seen that video, definitely encourage you to check it out after this. But yeah, the city of Salt Lake City is definitely on the rise. There's a lot of folks moving into the area. They're getting potentially new sports teams. They just recently were awarded the 2034 Olympic Games. Yeah. So there's a lot to be excited about in the city of Salt Lake at the moment. They also, in addition to all of that, have some pretty interesting expansions to their transit network on the way. Some of them already approved and going to be built. Some of them still in the planning phase, but there's definitely a lot to look at.
Those people who are going to Salt Lake, as Cities by Diana would say, for their pavement pilgrimage are going to be really disappointed when they get there and find trains.
Make your pavement pilgrimage to Salt Lake City with a grid system straight from the mind of God and streets wide enough for a Peterbilt with a 53-foot reefer to make a U-turn.
Yes, I don't know what they're going to do. It was also notably in a City Nerd video labeled as, I think it was in the top 3 for surface parking in downtown areas, which we definitely saw plenty of.
Yes.
But where they see surface parking lots, I see potential.
Put that on a t-shirt for you.
I came up with that on the spot. I did not say that ahead of time. Anyway, before we get into the exciting expansions, let's just give a brief overview of what Salt Lake City already has to offer with their existing public transit network.
Yeah, so first on that list is the Frontrunner. Now the Frontrunner is a commuter train that runs from Provo to Ogden, passing through Salt Lake City. When we visited Salt Lake City, which again, go back and watch that episode, we stayed in a hotel pretty far south from downtown, but we hopped on the Frontrunner and took that into downtown Salt Lake City. It was a great experience. The train was incredibly comfortable, and it was fast. As you can see in the video from that episode, we were passing traffic on the highway, so definitely moving quicker than it would have been to drive that day.
Totally, and along that route, it serves 17 stops with 4 million annual riders in 2023. Those numbers were actually higher in the pre-COVID era, but the numbers have been kind of going up in general since then and recovering, but still not fully back to what it was pre-COVID. And currently it is mostly just single track throughout, which is kind of the main limitation with the Frontrunner, with services that are running at its most frequent, basically every 30 minutes, which is not great, but it's better than nothing for sure, and better than what a lot of places across the country have. So,
better than what we have between Austin and San Antonio.
Totally. Moving on though from the Frontrunner, we have the Trax system. That is Salt Lake City's light rail, essentially. It currently operates 3 lines with 51 stations covering a total of 44 miles throughout the city.
And I found the Trax system to be really impressive when we were there. There's a lot more Trax trains than I expected, so we never waited longer than 10, maybe 15 minutes for a train, if that really.
Yeah.
And they got you within close proximity to at least everywhere that we were trying to go.
Totally.
And where we couldn't go on the tracks, at least the buses helped fill in some of the gaps.
It also, for being the light rail system, they went way further out of downtown than I thought. It's pretty impressive, and they've got great bones for being able to extend this later down the line. Yeah,
and as our friend Tyler said when he lived there, or when he lives there, when he was closer to the track system, it was pretty convenient to get around. But the Trax is very impressive. In 2023, they had around 11 million passengers total, so pretty good ridership for Salt Lake City, I think.
Absolutely. And I mentioned that there are 3 lines. There's a 4th line that we did not actually ride on our trip. And for some reason, it seems, if you're in Salt Lake City, let us know in the comments. It seems like it's separate, but not. The S line.
The S for secret.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not, because the other 3 are colors, and then you've got the S line. So let us know if S line is technically, if you count it as part. It frankly doesn't matter if you count it as part of Trax or not. It is another light rail system in the city, but we did not get a chance to ride it on our trip. And Then, as Chris alluded to, the kind of third key component to the Salt Lake City network that we got a chance to ride on this trip in a couple different instances is the bus network.
Yeah, and the bus network is pretty expansive. There are around 120 total bus lines throughout the entire city. And that includes 2 BRT lines as well.
Yep.
But we did have experience on the buses, and for the most part, the buses were fine. There were a couple of issues, if you go back and watch that video, a couple of issues with bus stops that were a little awkward. So for instance, on one bus stop, we were literally standing in the snow with no real pavement or anything around us.
Yeah.
So some uncomfortable bus stops, but for the most part, though, the buses were incredibly easy to use and got us around, in an efficient manner.
Totally, they were, and they also, I remember, I think the whole system integrated with the transit app too, right? I think we were able to buy our passes in the transit app and everything. Just to paint a full picture of the whole thing, though, overall, in 2023, they had 35 million riders throughout the whole system. So that includes Trax, Frontrunner, buses, and that compares to, just to give you the pre-COVID number as well, it was 44 million in 2019. So on the recovery, not all the way back there yet, but things are generally trending in the right direction. And again, for a city of its size, like, this is a super impressive system in my eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. Salt Lake City by no means is the largest city in the country, but it's also not very compact in a lot of ways. I mean, it is a very big, sprawling city. But the fact that you have so many transit options in this area is very, very impressive.
Right. And so much of it, too, had to rely. I remember a big thing when we were there was just how wide the roads were. You basically, like, you could still have 2 lanes or 3 lanes in either direction and put a light rail in the middle of the road, which is wild.
You have all of the space in the world to build in Salt Lake City. I think of city skylines where there's some expansions that you have like these massive roads that have like parking and bicycle lanes and a sidewalk and a median in the middle and a light rail, and it's like a road that is half the size of your city. Yeah, that's basically
reality.
Real life Salt Lake City.
Yes. So. Yeah. All right, so now that we've refreshed your memory on kind of the basis of the transit system in Salt Lake City, let's talk about some of the interesting expansions that are being proposed. This first one we kind of learned about right after we left, which is kind of funny. So if you'll remember, when we got off of the Frontrunner at the downtown station, Salt Lake Central, I think is what they call it, you get out and you're just kind of like next to like a rail yard and some like empty lots, and
it's just this big expanse of concrete. There's no real set building. There's a couple of shelters. There's no like bathroom.
Yeah, and we were there in the winter, so it was freezing also. In addition to all of this, and nothing about it felt very central. So enter the Rio Grande Plan that we learned about afterwards. Is a plan to kind of solve this issue. So what is the issue, I guess, first? We're going to jump right back into this episode in just a second, but first, if you have not liked this video, go ahead and do so. Also, leave a comment. We love reading all of them and respond to as many as we can. And be sure that you are subscribed so that you catch every episode as they come out.
Please share this with your friends, and if you don't have time to watch YouTube videos in the future, you can catch us on any of the podcast platforms that are out there. Just be sure to leave us a rating and give us a comment.
First off, you have these rail lines running through this portion of Salt Lake City. Very heavy freight traffic through this area. Obviously, freight lines in the United States, freight trains have gotten very, very long. Yes. It is not uncommon for these freight trains to literally just stop on the tracks in this area. And again, I mean, we're talking the edge of downtown Salt Lake City. And, it causes issues with downtown car traffic, pedestrians trying to cross over, bikes trying to cross over. It divides the community in half even more. There's also a highway right here too, so that exacerbates it. But it leads to issues for just people in general, but also transit. I mean, you can't reliably schedule bus connections over this section of town, all of these sorts of things. So, and then in addition to all that, this central station is just out of the way, like we were saying. The plan, though, is to move this rail alignment from where it stands today, which it was moved to somewhere between 20 and 30 years ago, back to its original location where we had run into this beautiful old building, the Rio Grande Depot.
Yeah, by accident.
By accident, we found it.
We walked 2 blocks up and
we
found
were
this
like,
building.
what the heck is this? This looks like a beautiful train station.
It looks like a train station.
Yeah. Sure enough, it was. And that is where the old rail right-of-way crosses right in front of. So the current plan is to realign the rail tracks back to the old right-of-way, which would be fairly straightforward to do because that's where they literally used to be. They would lower the tracks down, though, so think of like a kind of cut and cover style tunneling, except a lot of the plans don't actually show it being covered on the top, so it's just like a rectangular trench, just kind of like, you know, straight up walls on the sides, with the tracks sitting just below. Making it wide enough so that you would have dedicated tracks for the front runner going in both directions, dedicated tracks for the freight, as well as for the Amtrak going through this section of downtown, and then just re-meeting back up with the train lines on either side like they used to like 25 years ago. It, you know, is no doubt a very big plan, but that's the kind of main transit element of this. And what it initially does is free up a whole lot of space as far as where the old central station is, where an old existing rail yard is, and where some kind of defunct lots and empty buildings are for redevelopment in the area.
Yeah. I also love the idea of bringing new life to this existing transit corridor. And this station, the Rio Grande station, was built in 1910. It wasn't that long ago that they moved the tracks, so it's nice to see them sort of correcting, I think, what could be considered a mistake of the past.
Yeah.
And reintegrating this transit-oriented development into the city.
Absolutely, and again, it's in an area that just like we're right adjacent to downtown. It's prime real estate, and right now is just being heavily underutilized for what it is. And it seems like a total win. It's not like there is much productive or anything productive happening in a lot of those empty lots. And some of them are, I mean, I remember when we were walking through there, it was literally abandoned. We were like, where are we? Like, what is going on? So yeah. In addition to this, it also would involve rerouting. Some of the plans involve rerouting the tracks over one street, essentially, so that instead of connecting to the existing central station, it's more aligned with the new kind of Rio Grande station. Although some of the plans have it staying in the existing spot because there are some bus connections there. Still a lot of details kind of being worked out in all of this, but all in all, it would involve having up to 75 acres of developable land surrounding this, what would be an amazing transit-oriented development.
Yeah, and that's incredible, especially as we look at the U.S., we look at sort of the housing crisis, especially the crisis of lack of affordable housing. Cities like Salt Lake City are obviously a little less expensive to move into when you compare it to cities like Los Angeles or San Francisco or Austin. But all of these cities have seen their property values go up, especially since COVID. And so anything that we can do to add more housing, especially with a focus on affordable housing, is going to be good for these cities. So I think this is, like you said, it's a win-win for Salt Lake City. And it seems to have support from the local community as well. The Salt Lake City County? Salt Lake County voted for this in early August.
Yeah, and to give some backstory on the vote, so the Rio Grande Plan was not initially a government, not initially, it just wasn't a government proposal, actually. It was brought forward by a citizen group, a group of engineers, and we'll put a link to the actual website that they've put together for folks to check out. But it was brought forward by this group of citizens who are engineers, mostly by trade. And yeah, literally in August of this year, which is a couple weeks ago, the county voted to, you know, at least signal support. There's not funding or anything tied into this yet, but they've passed support. I read a few articles when doing research for this that the governor had plans to get in direct discussions with the state legislature, with the city government. So the pieces are really falling into place where this might be a perfect moment where you get the trifecta between the state government, the city government, the county, all being like, hey, this is clearly a big win for our community. This would be a huge win for this part of Salt Lake City and for the city as a whole. Let's make it happen. So
if only we could do that in Texas.
I know. I was as I was putting this together, I was like, I want a Rio Grande Plan for like the Austin Amtrak station.
Yeah. But this is a really huge win for community groups, and it's a testament to the things that we've talked about episode after episode after episode on this show, is that community groups can come together and create real change in their communities. We saw this with our San Antonio episode where we talked to the Strong Towns folks. They are working directly with the city on doing things like road audits to improve safety in their city. We see this in Austin with the Restart Lone Star Rail, which is going to have a new name sometime soon, I think.
Even Safe Streets Austin with the City League program, like all sorts of different things like this, where it's initiatives being brought forward not by governments, but by individual people, by nonprofit organizations, trying to introduce these ideas to get our elected officials to actually go out there and do some good.
So use this as inspiration. Look at your city. What areas in your city can you improve? And, you know, talk to your neighbors, put a little plan together. These things do happen and they do work. This is a great example. Along with the Rio Grande Plan, there is continued expansion in Salt Lake City, as we sort of alluded to earlier. One of the most notable expansion projects is the Trax expansion. As we mentioned, Trax is the light rail system that follows a lot of the old trolley network throughout Salt Lake City. And with the Trax expansion, we see the Orange Line being a brand new line that they're adding to the system.
Right, and the Orange Line, while it doesn't add a ton of new terrain, I guess, to the track system, it helps make it so that you have another potential direct connection depending on where you're trying to go. So on the far eastern end, it starts at the airport, runs through downtown, follows the red line out all the way to the University of Utah, and then makes a branch off from the red line into some new terrain further to the west. Again, not all new stuff. A lot of it is kind of running on existing tracks that follow some of the other colors of the track system. But it definitely is going to have the effect of adding a lot more frequency to kind of those main trunks where people are trying to travel along, and adding a whole layer of convenience for folks who might not need to make a transfer now somewhere along the system.
So definitely an improvement to the overall system. In addition to the expansion with the addition of the Orange Line, you also have a little bit of an extension on the S Line as well. I believe at least one stop being added to the S Line, so some improvement there too.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I mean, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit too for them still with the track system. Again, we had mostly positive experiences with it, but the one thing that drove me so nuts the whole time we were on it, and I said it several times throughout that episode, was that we were essentially just getting stuck at red lights, like in between stations. So some easy low-hanging fruit for UTA could be to add some signal prioritization for the tracks, and that would make these new additions to the system that much better, that much more effective, especially ahead of, you know, the city hosting these big events moving forward. Beyond that, though, we also have some additional expansion and just general improvements to the Frontrunner commuter service.
Yeah, and as we said, we had a really great experience on the Frontrunner, and actually, if you go back and watch that video, we had to run to catch it because we thought it was going to be late, and it was not. But the Frontrunner already was a great experience. It's a very comfortable train, but it is still subject to being stuck on the line, whether that is because of a freight train or some other reason. So part of the expansion of the Frontrunner is to double track the lines, which I don't know how we feel about adding an extra lane of train. I don't know.
It's okay when it's trains, Chris. It's okay when it's trains. So, so we double tracking. So I believe for the whole duration of this, when it's complete, Frontrunner will be on its own dedicated right-of-way, period, through the whole start to finish, which is fantastic. Like I mentioned lightly earlier, right now, currently, you only have frequencies every 30 to 60 minutes because of the areas where it's still single-tracked. This is going to make it so that you could essentially, I don't want to say infinitely, but you could almost infinitely increase the amount of capacity and frequency when you have, you know, double tracking throughout the entire system. This would be able to move a ton of people very quickly, far, far, far more than the extremely wide highway that it runs alongside.
Which evidence, riding the train, we went faster than the cars.
We did go faster than the cars.
This guarantees you faster travel.
Yes. In addition to the double tracking, though, the commuter line is also getting longer. Like we said at the beginning, this is already over 80 miles long between Provo all the way to Ogden, with Salt Lake City being in between. It's going to have an expansion to the north through Pleasant View, Willard, and Brigham City, having stops in each of those places, as well as heading south through Springville, Spanish Fork, and Payson. So new communities being connected directly on the Frontrunner train with access to each other, but also right to downtown Salt Lake City.
Yeah, and it's impressive that the line is already 80 miles long. When we look at the Amtrak line between Austin and San Antonio to major metro areas, It is 70-ish miles long, just over 70, and we struggle to have any reliable train service between the two. So
oh my God, I don't even want to
kudos to Salt Lake City and Utah for being able to build this and run it.
If we had something like even close to the quality of that could keep the speeds, oh my God, the amount of people who would ride that freaking train. Oh, someday. I have hopes. In addition to the expansion to Trax, the Frontrunner, and the Rio Grande Plan, there's also some BRT expansion being built out. The quotes were not around expansion; it was more around BRT. Okay. Salt Lake City does operate some like real BRT. At least sections of it are real. I think it's like Ogden has a line, and there might be one other one, and it generally funnels people into main bus lines, the Frontrunner, and even into Trax in some cases. But so there's one new BRT being built out. It connects. It's a fairly long line. We'll put up a graphic. It heads to the north, but it connects folks from the kind of communities north into the Frontrunner a little bit better, and then also kind of juts out into Salt Lake City. So it's just kind of connecting different areas that might have required several transfers before, trying to bridge the gaps. Some of it sounds like will be in dedicated lanes, but it sounds more so like, it's a bus lane on the right that is a right turning lane in the bus lane, not necessarily what like a BRT might be, where you've got like dedicated center lanes with no one else in them.
The US version of BRT.
Yes.
If you need to know more about BRT, go back and watch our episode on it. We talk about BRT systems across the country and across the world and their benefits. For this, it very much sounds like a North American BRT, where you're not having necessarily the completely dedicated right-of-ways or separation from traffic, but basically really nice bus lanes.
Right.
One thing that concerns me about expansions of BRT, again, we talked about this in that episode about BRTs, is that unlike trains, you can very easily remove BRT.
Right.
And it makes me a little worried that if we rely too heavily on adding BRT systems in places like Salt Lake,
they could disappear.
They could disappear.
Like we've literally seen in Houston. It's also so easy to water it down with like budget constraints. It's like, oh, well, I guess it probably doesn't need its own dedicated lane here, and oh well, we could probably do without the bus lane there so that we could get access to this, and then all of a sudden it turns into a bus. It turns into the Primo bus in San Antonio.
Exactly. So they absolutely serve a purpose, and as long as the system is working for the residents of those areas, then that's great. And I guess what is very encouraging is that we see this BRT as part of a larger expansion of the total transit network in the Salt Lake City region.
Totally.
So by all means, happy to see it in this expansion plan.
But that's most of the plans that are like very, solid or have a lot of political support behind them right now, and just support of the people in Salt Lake right now. There are a couple other proposals that we'll mention right now just to put them out there. I don't think either of these are going to happen anytime soon. I could be wrong. You never know. One of them is, this was a very early episode. Also during this, we were able to talk to Julia from the Salt Lake Climbers Alliance about the proposed gondola in Little Cottonwood Canyon. This was, obviously, Chris and I are very pro gondola if you've watched more than a couple episodes of this in general. But this was the first gondola project where Julia convinced me that it's probably not the best move for the spot. You can go watch me in real time change my mind on it during the interview. That morning I was fully like, we should build it.
The about face was amazing.
Yeah. And it was, I'm happy to be proved wrong, So that is still like a proposal though from the Utah Department of Transportation to potentially happen. It's very likely not going anywhere though. So that's one potential thing, and there was a lot of like, is this going to happen for the Olympics? Little Cottonwood Canyon doesn't even necessarily have any Olympic events planning to happen there. A lot of that stuff is going to be happening over in Park City, more likely than not.
Which, that is one thing I don't think that we've really touched on much in this episode. A lot of this expansion is maybe not gearing up for the Olympics, but will greatly benefit the city once the Olympics do come to town, because the Winter Olympics are coming in
2034.
Yeah, 2034. So
10 years from now.
We have a little bit of time, but it is going to be rapidly approaching, and anything that the city can do to better improve infrastructure you know, it's going to help with the Olympics. And this is also not Salt Lake City's first rodeo when it comes to the Olympics.
For sure.
So.
And I mean, on this note too, I mean, Los Angeles is currently going through the same thing. The Los Angeles, actually, I don't think we've talked about this note on this show because it came out after we did our Olympics episode. Los Angeles is literally billing it as a car-free games. I don't know if you even saw that, but they're obviously, this will be an episode for sure. Los Angeles is going crazy hard on, even despite the Olympics, on their public transit network. Lots of expansions being done at the moment. They're working on bike infrastructure, trains. You're going to have the Bright Line West. You've got California High-Speed Rail. All sorts of stuff going on there.
Yeah.
We'll have to go out and do an episode there, and we can connect with Travis Stone from who you know what I'm talking about, Rethink 35 and everything, who lives out there now.
Yeah.
So to do an episode there. Yes, so that's definitely something to look for in the future. The only other proposal that I've seen floating around the internet, and I've honestly not seen anyone from Salt Lake City really propose this, I could be wrong here, but good Twitter follow at the Transit Guy. He put out a proposed rail idea from Salt Lake City to Park City, saying we should get this thing built essentially before the Olympics. It would be very cool, don't get me wrong. But I just, that one there's more complexities for sure. And it's maybe not going to happen in time for the Olympics. Maybe at some point we get something like that. I don't know. But
that runs into the problem of, are we only serving skiing tourists?
Right. I mean, there's a lot of people who are working in the industry too, though, because again, we talked all about this in the taking the bus, the ski bus nightmare or whatever. You're serving a lot of employees and whatnot to these areas too. But yeah, no, I mean, that's something to keep in mind with all of these. Again, you don't want to overbuild for the Olympics and then just have this infrastructure that you can't afford to keep up afterwards. Same thing in Rio. We talked about that. We saw that even in all sorts of different places that have hosted the Olympics. You see these just like facilities just literally rotting away slowly. That's not the way to do it. Hopefully, and it seems like Salt Lake City is taking the right steps, that these sorts of improvements that we're talking about, sure, they're going to have major benefits for the Olympics, but they're also going to just have major benefits in general for the city, and they're not going too crazy, right? Like none of these things that we just proposed are off the walls crazy that aren't going to have major benefits for the people in the short term and in the long term. They're reasonable, interesting, fun, cool, unique solutions in a lot of cases to kind of really benefit the city.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely agree. I'm excited to see the expansion. I'm excited for people who live in Salt Lake City. We'll have to go back out there at some point. We'll reach out to Tyler and see if he's going to benefit from any of these expansions. But with that is a good overview, I think, of Salt Lake City. It's a nice recap of what we've done there before. If you have any comments about the Salt Lake City expansion, if you're from Salt Lake City and you've watched our other episodes, please reach out to us. Send us an email at, what's the email address?
transittangentspod@gmail.com. You can also, like at this stage, we read the comments below for sure, so leave a comment. You can reach out on social media, all that good stuff. We definitely want to hear from you. If you have a fun project in your city that you want us to take a look at that might be similar to some of this, definitely let us know as well. Like we said a couple times over the last few episodes, we've done a lot of broad episodes over the summer for the most part, but we definitely really want to start to dive in on specific regions like we did on this one with Salt Lake City, specific systems in some cases. So we're open to your ideas and feedback. We've got lots of fun ideas coming up soon, so definitely stay tuned for all of that.
And to help us get to your city or to whatever other city you would like to see us do a deep dive on, please, if you have made it to the end of this video and you enjoy our content, go to our website. There's a little button that says support. If you click that, it takes you to buy me a coffee. You can buy us a coffee, and all of that money, of course, then goes to helping us produce more of these videos and getting out there into the field.
With all that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your Transit Tangents Tuesday.
Yeah, I'm saving that dough. Public transit's where it's at. Watch me go.